Good evening. My name is Sean Ulmer. I'm Executive Director here at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. And I want to thank you all for joining me for another in our series of one-night stands. This is where we look at one work by one artist for one night. And tonight we're going to be looking at Grant Wood's Imagination Isle. But before I begin, I just want to do a shout out to my friend and colleague, Lisa Stone. Lisa is the former curator of the Roger Brown Study Collection at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And it was in that capacity, being at the Roger Brown studio, that I met her. She's part of the historic artist homes and studio group that the Grant Wood Studio is a part of. And so I got to know Lisa through her management of the Roger Brown studio, and her through our management of the Grant Wood studio. And it was a presentation that Lisa did by Zoom at Intuit, the Center for Intuitive and Outsider Art in Chicago, called One Night Stand, that gave birth to our series. I tuned in to hear her speak about one of the pieces in Intuit's collection, and I liked the whole concept of looking at one work by one artist for one night. Very casual, short presentation. And so I said, well, why not? Why can't we do that at Cedar Rapids? So it was really through Lisa Stone and her presentation for Intuit that we gave rise to the idea of doing a one-night stand series here at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. So my thanks to Lisa for that and for all that she's done for the Roger Brown study collection at the Roger Brown studio. And I also have another shout out to Lisa as well, because it was actually Lisa's idea that I present on Grant Wood's Imagination Isle to the 32nd International Panorama Council conference, which was happening in Iowa City this year. So Lisa was very interested in speaking about Imagination Isles herself, but she found another topic that she was equally excited about. And so she reached out to me and said, hey, you guys are in possession of the frieze, and how would you, Sean, like to present or submit a proposal to present a paper at this conference? And so I jumped at the opportunity, making sure she really wasn't going to do a presentation on this, really didn't want to do it. And so it was actually Lisa who suggested the topic to me. Both she and I were accepted at the conference, which, as I said, was held in Iowa City this year. It was in late September of this year. Last year it was in Luxembourg. So it does move around the globe. This year it happened to be in Iowa City, which was very convenient for us. And so I gave my paper there, and that's the paper I'm going to read for you this evening. And I also hosted a number of these scholars and presenters at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art the following day. So because they were in such close proximity, they were able to come up in carpools and were able to visit the Grant Wood studio, as well as see the Grant Wood collection and really the whole museum on their visit here. So all very, very fortuitous, and my thanks very much to Lisa Stone for making this all happen. So as I mentioned, I'm going to kind of reprise my presentation to the 32nd International Panorama Council Conference. It is a short paper by design. The papers were to be 15 to 20 minutes at the most. So they were short papers. There were quite a few presenters. And so I'll give you this, I'll read the short paper to you, along with the images that I presented at that time. And then afterwards, talk a little bit about the discussion that happened afterwards, and the visit by the group that came up the following day. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Good morning. It was a morning presentation. Good morning. Before I begin, I would like to thank the International Panorama Council for inviting me to speak at this conference. I would also like to thank fellow presenter and good friend Lisa Stone for suggesting that I present a paper on Grant Wood's Panorama Imagination Isle. Lisa has been a great fan of Grant Wood and the Grant Wood Studio for many, many years. It was her suggestion that I pursue this idea to share with this august group. When people think of Grant Wood, they think of this work, American Gothic. Created in 1930, not only is this Grant Wood's most famous work, it is arguably the most famous American painting of all time. It is certainly the second most recognizable painting in the world, next to Leonardo's Mona Lisa. It is also the most parodied painting of all time. But Grant Wood was much more complex artist than this single painting might indicate. Born on a farm in Anamosa, Iowa, a small town 30 miles from Cedar Rapids, he was a talented artistic child. These talents blossomed in high school in Cedar Rapids, where his family had moved when he was 10 upon the death of his father. After graduation from high school in 1910, he began his career as a metalwork artist after spending 2 summers studying metalsmithing at the School of Design, Handicraft, and Normal Art in Minneapolis, Minnesota. While he took a couple of life drawing classes with Charles Cumming in Iowa City in 1912, Wood largely taught himself to paint, adopting an American Impressionistic style, which was widely popular in the United States in the early 20th century. Serving in World War I, he painted camouflage for military vehicles while stationed in Washington, D.C. Upon the conclusion of the war, Wood returned to Cedar Rapids without a job and few prospects. He had a great artistic talent and applied to teach at Jackson Junior High School, and Principal Francis Prescott, recognizing his abilities, hired him in 1919. When McKinley Junior High School opened in 1921, Prescott moved there to be principal, and she took Grant Wood with her. It was at McKinley that Wood worked with a group of 45 ninth grade boys to create the Imagination Isle panorama. Created in 1924, Imagination Isles was a 12-inch high scroll painting that ran 155 feet in length. It was created by Grant Wood's ninth grade boys' art class to be placed around the circumference of the basement cafeteria for the enjoyment of all the students dining there. However, since parents and friends of the school would be unlikely to see it, a little theater was made for the frieze by the manual training department of the school. The spool arrangement would allow for the canvas to be wound and unwound slowly by means of a crank. All the mechanicals were hidden so that the audience would only see the scene unfurl and progress in front of them. According to a November 22nd, 1924 article in the Cedar Rapids Evening Gazette, the experience was described as this. The lights in the auditorium are turned low. A boy comes before the curtains and extends to the audience an invitation to accompany him to the Imagination Isle. Drawing back the velvet curtains, he reveals a miniature stage, all in soft tones of blue. As he completes his invitation, tinkling music sounds softly, and then on the little stage, there begins to unwind slowly a scene from fairyland. As the panorama unwound, the boy would read a script written by Wood to accompany the performance. Several pages long, it read in part, I invite you to come with me on a 10-minute trip through the Imagination Isles. You shall see brilliantly colored trees of shape unknown to science, silhouetted against purple mountains. Mountains whose snow-capped peaks pierce the saffron skies. Fantastic tropical plants with luscious fruits and flowers in amazing profusion wait only your coming and your choosing. A sea, bluer even than the blue Mediterranean, beats against the base of each jewel-like island and frets itself into a snowy foam. Upon this sea float ships of romantic shape. Glistening white castles with turrets and towers are all door ajar for your visit. These boats and these buildings are unoccupied. They await you if you can come. The narrative continues. No human body can visit these islands. Only the spirit can come. Your spirit is always a welcome guest. Your spirit and your friends, my friends and mine, there is always room for all of us at any time. We may dip into the fragrant coolness of the indigo ocean. We may live as long as we please in our choice of mother-o'-pearl palaces without fear of intruding upon anyone or of anyone intruding upon us. We pay no rent. We are guests. The text continues to describe the spirit-based 10-minute journey through the 155-foot panoramic scroll, touching on topics such as geography, literature, music, and of course, art. Sadly, only 22 feet of the original 155-foot panorama survives. It is owned by the Cedar Rapids Community School District, but housed at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. I have been sharing photographs of individual sections of the scroll while reading the narrative, but I also undertook to stitch these photographs together to give you a sense of the continuous nature of the work. So where did this come from? Where might Grant Wood have thought up this idea? Although based in Cedar Rapids for most of his career, Wood's artwork sometimes betrays his knowledge of art and art movements across the country, past and present, as well as in Europe. For example, in the sketchbook for his later stained glass window for the Veterans Memorial Building in Cedar Rapids, the largest stained glass window in the United States at the time, one of his sketches demonstrates that he was contemplating a design based on Michelangelo's Pietà, although he never saw the work in person. In another example from the same sketchbook, we see Wood looking at an established prototype of the seated figure of Justice as a possible model for his main figure in the window. Here, a late 13th century manuscript illustration by Laurent d'Orléans for Philip III of France, a work that Wood would not have seen firsthand, represents a type he would have gleaned in reproduction. While the ultimate composition was quite different, we know from evidence such as this and other extant artifacts that Wood was a voracious reader of art books and magazines and was well aware of the world outside Cedar Rapids. In addition, his first trip to France in 1920 with his best friend and fellow artist Marvin Cohn was a revelation. While we have an idea of the museums and activities the two young Cedar Rapidians saw and engaged in while in Paris from Cohn's diary of the trip, what specific works they saw were not singled out by name. However, upon his return from France, Wood produced some unusual works that betray his experience of French art, including A Fantasy of Spring from 1921, a scene obviously not of the Cedar Rapids countryside, which probably never had nude nymphs frolicking in the woods. Adoration of the Home from 1921-1922, a small billboard advertising a new subdivision where the city met the country, classically inspired with representations of Demeter and Hermes, and fanciful depiction of the roundhouse and power plant from 1923, whose architecture with its fanciful spires most closely resembles those in the castles of the Imagination Isles the following year. Each of these works not only demonstrate the potential influence of European art shortly after his return from France, they also represent an unusual one-off creation, much like Imagination Isles, his only panoramic composition. Wood could also have been influenced by a local mural created for the upper register of People's Savings Bank in Cedar Rapids, a 1911 bank designed by world-renowned architect Louis Sullivan. The murals, created by Alan E. Philbrick, centered on the theme of an allegory of seasonal changes expressed through scenes of architecture, commerce, and industry. In them, one sees an extended band of imagery at the upper level of the main space in a position similar to what Wood had planned for the Imagination Isles panorama. In addition, each long side presents a continuous extended landscape populated by trees, fields, and the occasional structure where one could enter as a spirit. Imagination Isles is quite unique in Wood's career. Shortly after its creation, he was to leave his teaching position and paint full-time, taking local commissions to support himself until his 1930 American Gothic moment changed his place in American art history forever. While unique, it continues to serve as a testament to Wood's insatiable exploration of art in all of its forms. I would like to end by sharing a brief video created by the Whitney Museum of American Art on the occasion of their Grant Wood retrospective in 2018. While they were not able to borrow Imagination Isles due to its fragility, as well as the difficulty in showing even a 22-foot section of the original, they found a way to include it in the exhibition and to engage a whole new generation of young people in the process.
Before he hit it big with American Gothic, that he was experimenting a lot. I think it's really interesting how Grant Wood painted what he knew, because it gave him room to experiment and to put his own take on his landscapes. It seemed like rebellion because his father wanted him to farm. He sort of is making you think about, why does that represent America, and what does it really mean to represent America?
What is America? Who constitutes the American population? What is the country about? It seemed a wonderful idea to have the students involved with the Whitney Museum replicate this mural project.
Grant Wood painted this mural for the cafeteria of McKinley Junior High School in Cedar Rapids, and he painted it with his 9th grade students from 1924 to 1925. The teams are going to be painting the mural in full.
And in a way, having the students recreate the mural honors his vision more than if we had brought the mural from Cedar Rapids.
I think it's really cool that he had his students involved in it to make art more accessible. Imagination Isles reminds you of something in a fairy tale, like something you read in a book when you're younger. He uses these bold colors and just doesn't put a lot of detail into the work, especially with what we're doing now. It allows me to put myself in the setting and to imagine what it would be like to be there and to think about different aspects of American life.
And here one sees the recreated Imagination Isles on the walls of the Whitney Museum of American Art. Imagination Isles holds a special place in Grant Wood's life and career. It marks the high point of his time teaching at the Cedar Rapids Community School District, and at the same time gave him an indication of the support his work would receive from the local community and the art world as a whole. Its popularity, along with the availability of a free studio space that same fall, allowed Wood to give up his teaching position and work as a full-time professional artist in Cedar Rapids. Both were important stepping stones to the eventual creation of American Gothic 6 years later and the fame that would follow. Thank you. So at this point, stop sharing and tell you just a little bit about um, some of the conversation that happened after the presentation. There was quite a bit of discussion about how, Grant Wood was able to wrangle 45 ninth grade boys into doing one thing. But I think in the same way that the Whitney was able to get a group of teenagers involved in recreating the Imagination Isles, there was a certain sort of collaborative fascination in both the Whitney's version and in Grant Wood's, I think, original version, focusing these ninth grade boys on this single task. Originally to be installed around the circumference at the point where the wall meets the ceiling of the cafeteria in the lower level of McKinley, but ultimately became instead kind of a movie, something that would be put on dowels and had a framework built for it that allowed it to be played so that the general public could enjoy it as well, and allowed Grant Wood to tap into his creative writing skills and create this sort of script that went along. I only read you an excerpt from it, but it went on to talk about various other disciplines and really did create a full sort of 10-minute journey through Imagination Isles. So it was some of the other things that were noted by some of the audience members at the conference were, that the land is completely unpopulated, that it is totally up to you as the viewer to populate the scene. This whole space is created for you. It's at your disposal. You can enter it, and you can stay as long as you want, just as the script indicates. You can stay as long as you want. You don't have to worry about somebody else being in the castle that you want to be in. You don't have to leave because somebody else is coming. It is really a place that you go to in your mind. And someone noted in the conference, well, this is really not that long after the horrors of World War I. And some of these boys may have lost family members, may have lost fathers or uncles or grandfathers, what have you, in World War I. And that, up until that point, probably one of the, the most traumatic experiences for the country. And this might have been, a wonderful opportunity for not just these ninth grade boys, but others to kind of escape, to go someplace that is calm and idyllic, a place that they can visit in their imagination, which is why it's called Imagination Isles. And that, we need to sort of also keep in mind that the war had just happened, which I thought was a really wonderful observation on the part of that audience member, to say that this is someplace that people could visit. They could visit any time, day or night, and it may have been a wonderful outlet for sort of kind of getting away from a rapidly changing world, a rapidly changing United States, one that had just experienced quite a bit of trauma in the First World War, and that might have had a very personal impact. Certainly, Grant Wood, served in World War I. He didn't see any action, but he certainly knew people who did. And he was not alone in that. And these young boys might have as well. And people were just really fascinated by, the size of the panorama. I mean, there were many panoramas discussed and presented at the conference. This one was fairly unique compared to that, and compared to the others that were presented, and people really did enjoy it. And then the following day, participants who were still in town were able to come up to the museum and visit the Grantwood studio. And the museum's curator, Julia Jessen, and I had a surprise plan for them. We actually had gotten Imagination Isles out of storage where it was, and we unrolled about half of it, a portion of it, in a special place in the museum, and surprised the attendees with it. And before we rolled it up, and it wasn't fully extended, but before we rolled it up, we did ask our communications coordinator to see if she could, possibly capture a little video clip of it, to just so people could have a sense of it, the continuous nature of the piece. And she did, and I want to share that with you now. So I'm going to share my screen again, and hopefully we can get this up and rolling here. Okay. And now it has no sound, but you'll get a sense of the image here. So in my presentation, I stitched individual still shots together after scaling them all the same, but this is much more effective way to see at least a portion, probably just over half, probably about 11 feet, just a portion of the scroll, so you get a real sense of the continuous nature of it. That wonderful fanciful ship, and this is how we have it stored on this kind of roll. Okay, so be happy to answer any questions that I might be able to. These are shorter programs. One night stands are shorter programs by design, and they're very casual. So if you have any questions, please unmute yourself, and I'd be happy to try to answer it.
Hi, is it known what happened to the rest of the length of it?
No, it is not. That's a great question. No, we don't know what happened to it. Could still be out there. So keep your eyes open, everybody. We would love to have some more, but yeah, just these 22 feet remain. And like I said, it is in the possession of the Cedar Rapids Community School District. They're the owners of it. It's housed here at the museum. So I imagine at some point it was cut down. And that's the part that remains, and the school district has hung on to it. So I have no idea what would have happened to the rest. I mean, obviously it was long and unwieldy. If it was ever attached to the wall of the cafeteria, it may have been on those rollers that whole time. That part's really not clear. We know that it was originally intended to be in the cafeteria, and then it was put into a kind of a box where they could roll it and unroll it, but I don't know that it was ever undone from that. But at some point it was cut down, and I'm not sure where the rest of it went. I've never seen any bits and pieces of it anywhere. It's not like it was cut up and given in portions to the boys who worked on it, nothing like that. No pieces have ever come forward, but it's possible there's a big roll of it somewhere and no one's unrolled it. Nobody knows for sure where it is, but yeah, there's no documentation what happened to the remaining majority of the scroll.
That's wild. Okay, thank you very much. And
keep your eyes out.
Oh, for sure. Were you able to go to Luxembourg the year before?
No, but others were, yeah. And so I did not know very much about the International Panorama Council until Lisa Stone brought it to my attention. But yeah, they have an annual conference in a different location around the globe every year. This one conveniently was right here in Iowa City. So I was able to kind of bop on down and do the presentation. So no, but several of the people who were in attendance this year in September had been at the previous conference in Luxembourg the previous year. And so it's a group that gets together. We're fascinated with panoramas in many different forms, and there are a shocking number, really surprising number of panoramas that are out there. Some in disrepair, some in really great shape. That these people these scholars specialize in preserving and presenting and kind of keeping the public aware of, keeping the public engaged with, keeping the public supporting of, because it is sort of a unique art form, one that was very, very popular in history, but a little less so now. So, but yeah, they were thrilled to see Grant Wood's foray into this medium, his only journey in that regard, and created really an amazing piece that extraordinarily long for a very specific purpose. But yeah, it was very nice to be able to share Grant Wood with this really impressive group of international scholars.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing this with us.
Thanks, Angie.
Sean, we have a couple questions. One of them is, and you may have said this, what is the material this is painted on? Is it paper or canvas?
It is on canvas. It
On
is
canvas.
on canvas, yeah. Mhm.
Okay. And then our next question is, how is it preserved? So it doesn't chip, so it doesn't flake.
It's very thinly painted, and it is on that roll that you saw at the end of that little video I played for you. And so it is in really great shape. It's a little dirty on the front end of things. As you kind of get further into the middle of that 22-foot segment that we have, the colors are brighter, they're cleaner. So it is preserved on that roll, which is housed on that roll, and it seems to work. I thought the same thing. Why is this not chipping or cracking? But the nature of how thinly it's painted allows it to not chip or crack.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, as you can imagine, it's a difficult piece to show, given its dimensions. But I thought this was a nice way to show it through the presentation by stitching the entirety of our 22-foot section together in the paper itself, but then also using the conference as an excuse to get it out and enroll it at least partially, and then capture it on video. I think is something we can use and utilize in the future when talking about this. We obviously can show it in portions, but we're really short on display cases that are 22 feet in length. So it's not likely to be shown in its entirety anywhere. But I thought also that the Whitney Museum's approach to kind of enlivening or re-enlivening Imagination Isles was a great idea, and to get young people involved in recreating it. Looks like they had a great time and they did a nice job with it. And you can see how carefully and scientifically they they kind of analyzed the colors so that they were recreating it very authentically. Chat here. Did any of the student painters ever speak about it or get quoted in the press about working with wood? Not that I've seen. The 45 boys are all listed by name in one of the Gazette articles. But I have not seen since then them speaking about it or about working with wood on it. So there was this moment, this flurry at the time that the piece was created and presented to the public, where there were several Gazette articles, but then it gets very quiet. Then there's nothing that really people seem lose interest in it or just forgot about it or something. And you never see it really pop up again in the press, which is a great source of information for things about Grant Wood. He was written about quite a bit in the local newspapers, and so a lot of sort of that in real time historical information, as opposed to a lot of the anecdotal information that we hear about Grant Wood. The newspaper archives are a great source for information about Grant Wood. So for anyone who's interested in learning more about Grant Wood from his contemporaries, from people of his own time, and from himself, actually, the newspaper articles are a great source of information. I have found it was wonderful to find these articles on the presentation of Imagination Isle to the public, and kind of how the public received it, and in what high regard the community held Grant Wood in his lifetime. He was not one of those local artists that you discover after they die. He and Marvin Cohn and other Cedar Rapids artists were well appreciated during their lifetime, and that's not true of all artists in every community, but certainly in this community, they were recognized for their abilities, their talents, and what they contributed to the local scene, and they were well covered in the paper and well supported by the local community. So I imagine there might be some family stories out there that haven't made their way to us, but they may still come. These would have been, in all likelihood, they were ninth grade boys, in 1924. So they would have been, could have been someone's grandparents or potentially great grandparents. So stories could come down through the family, but just have not made it to us yet. Anything else? Well, if not, I want to thank you then for joining me this evening. We'll have another one night stand next month, and our curator, Julia Jessen, will be taking that one on. And I look forward to seeing you in the future. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.